a young child, Nolan Wilson. He was in the NICU unit with Ruby, so good connections and friends out of that kind of situation between families. And so they got a post from that they pray for him. He is having some troubles. He's in the hospital. He's got a turn that's a little bit worse. He's at the highest amount of support he can have for getting oxygen, shorter than putting in a ventilator. And they're monitoring him hour by hour to see if they're going to have to go to the ventilator. Obviously, that's not a thing you want to do to anybody, and certainly to a young child from that. So they're monitoring that. So they would like us to pray for him and to pray for the family as well. So we certainly want to do that. Anybody else that we need to particularly be mindful of? Or did you want to add anything to that, Dawn? Was that good? I know there's a couple of wives out tonight for some health issues, so we should pray for them and their husbands to make it all right when they're on their own, so we have that to worry about. Get home safely. All right, if you bow with me. Heavenly Father, we're so grateful for the opportunity to come to you and to share our concerns about these that we've talked about. For regards to illness, we're certainly want to put up our prayers, particularly for Nolan and his family, and hopefully that he will improve and his health will come back, and he'll have a short stay in the hospital and come home and enjoy life as a young child should. We ask you to be with our brethren in India and what persecution they're going through. Give them strength in this time, and to be true and keep them safe and healthy. We ask that you be with the many others that we know of on our prayer list, some that we may know of individually, and many that you may be the only one that knows about. But we know that you'll do what is your will in those cases. We certainly ask for full return of health and return back to their lives, and in many cases a return here to be with us so that we can edify one another. But we ask that you give them strength. We ask you to be with your missionaries around the world, that you be with your congregations and their leadership, wherever they may be found, with your governments to allow for free execution of our faith and strengthening of that. We ask always your guidance as we study. Help us to learn from your word and apply it to our lives. We pray this in your Son's name. Amen. All right. So let's do a quick review. It's never quick with me, but I'll say it's going to be quick, and that way I can pretend. All right. Dreams and visions. We wrapped up last week dreams, so we'll wrap up the dreams that we talked about, and this week we're actually going to get to go to visions. So there you go. So we talked about the wise men at the time of the birth of Jesus. The wise men came from the east, which is recognized throughout the Bible basically as a source of wisdom for one thing or another. They could have been astronomers, they could have astrologers, they could have been, dream interpreters, et cetera, those types of people. But they came from the east to Jerusalem. And they came there because a star had appeared to them to the east. And they associated with it, whether they had gotten it from the Old Testament, and some stuff was said there. Balaam had said about it when he was blessing rather than cursing the people of Israel. But they associated that appearance of the star with the arrival of the King of the Jews. And so they came in pursuit of that and to worship him. So they went to Herod as the leader there in Jerusalem, and they asked him where was the King of the Jews to be born. And Herod, not being a Jew by his raising or by his heritage, but being a Jew by being a proselyte, didn't know. I didn't assume so anyway. So he asked the priests and the scribes about what is the birthplace. And of course they told him it was Bethlehem. And Bethlehem of Judea, because we said there's another Bethlehem in Galilee. Bethlehem of Judea, only 6 miles away. And he reports that to the wise men. He tells them to go there to Bethlehem, worship, and report back to me. Let me know so I can do the same. We know, of course, he had an ulterior motive. That was certainly not what he wanted to do. He wanted to protect his dynasty. So the wise men go, they find Jesus, they worship, they're giving him the 3 different gifts that makes us so many times believe there's 3 wise men. Doesn't say that. We just assume 3 gifts, 3 guys. But all we know is 3 gifts and some number of wise men, more than 1. A dream then is where it comes into play, is a dream comes from God telling them not to go back to Herod. Return home a different way. Don't go back to Herod and report it. I suspect they did, being wise men, kind of knew what was going on with Herod, and when he asked and said he's going to worship, I suspect they probably knew that anyway. But God wanted to make sure they didn't go back and cause more problems for Joseph, Mary, and Jesus at that point. So that's our dream, first dream we looked at last week. That followed up by Joseph's second dream. The wise men depart, they head back home to the east, and Joseph's their family, and he now has a dream. Now all these dreams that we see here aren't the way we think of dreams, because we don't really see any kind of visual aspect for it. We'll see that carrying over into visions oftentimes. All the visions that we'll talk about to start with and today and maybe the beginning of next week will be visions that don't have any image particularly to them. They are oral in both cases. So a dream, we don't know that there was any visual aspect to it. We're not told that. But he has a dream. And in that dream, the Lord warns Joseph that they should all go to Egypt. Remember, he has talked to him once before and telling him about the fact that the baby that his betrothed Mary is carrying is the Holy Spirit's and what he should do about that. Now he warns him that they should go to Egypt because of Herod and because of the fact that he wants to kill the new born Son of God. So God says, if you go to Egypt, you stay there until I tell you that Herod's died. Don't listen to rumors. Don't let anybody tell you that. I'm telling you to go. I'll tell you when to go return. So wait for me from that. I'll tell you when Herod's died. And so Joseph does exactly as he was directed to do. He takes his family and goes there. And we also noted that this exchange and him going and taking Jesus, the Messiah, to Egypt was a fulfillment of prophecy. That was something that had been foretold in the Old Testament from that. His third dream then, leading into that, Herod is very angry about the wise men. I want them to come back. They didn't come back, so, I can only assume some things out of that, maybe even had some kind of information. After all, it was only 6 miles away, but he's angry about that. And he wants to do something about this newborn king, if you will. So he had gotten information from the wise men. He had asked them, innocently, of course, what was the time frame in which the star first appeared. He thought, therefore, that might be when the baby was first born. At least that's a setting, a starting point. You wouldn't have a star show up, long time after. So clearly that's a setting point of when it may have been born. It may have been born somewhat before that, and so he'll make adjustments for that, as we'll see. He then ordered all the male babies killed that were 2 years old and under. So reminiscent of what happened in Egypt, right? The killing of the male children back there. That's what he had done, is the killing of all the children that were 2 years and younger from that. Again, going back to when did the star appear, and let's fudge a little bit to make sure, I've got him. He's in that time range. I should take care of him from that respect. So he's ordered all of that. That, again, is a fulfillment of prophecy, the mourning that would happen because of that, as the people, struggled with emotions of losing their children that way. And Joseph, therefore, has a dream from God, as he had promised. He fulfills it by saying, Herod's dead. It's time you go back into Israel. You go back into the promised land. Return now, because Herod is dead. And so, Joseph, as he has in the other two cases, is obedient. He does as God has directed him to do, and he starts to return back to Israel. That gets us to the fourth dream that Joseph has, the final one. This one, we have to realize that historically, Herod's kingdom was divided between 3 sons when he died. So he's dead, but the Roman government puts in his place actually his 3 sons and his sister were in charge of various pieces of what had been Herod's kingdom. All right? Now Joseph learns that one of the sons, Archelaus, is over Judea. That's not a good thing. Archelaus is, if anything, worse than his father. He's very violent, he's very brutal, he's already set up a reputation of that. And so when Joseph learns of that, Joseph's afraid to return to Jerusalem, to the area of Judea. That's not a promising thing. I've just escaped one problem to just have another person that's going to be much the same way, and we can definitely see him doing what Herod, his father, had claimed or had threatened to do already. So Joseph, again, has a dream. And in each one of these, we don't have any aspect, again, of a visual. God speaks to him. The Lord speaks to him. And God in this one warns him about returning there. Doesn't say don't go back to Israel, the promised land, if you will, but don't go back where Archelaus is in charge from that. And so Joseph takes his family to Galilee, specifically to Nazareth, which is ruled by another one of the sons, Antipas. Antipas is seen as very moderate, not really prone to doing these kind of bloody types of actions, and so he feels much safer about doing that. And of course, we read in one of the other Gospels that Nazareth is where they came from. So it's logical they would return there anyway, but for whatever reason, he seemed to be wanting to go to Judea to start with. All of that, again, fulfills a prophecy. So we see a lot of fulfillment of prophecy coming by God telling, and it makes a bigger point for those wanting to see the fulfillment of prophecies by having that dream and directing the path of Joseph and therefore the Messiah, that it lets us see, here's an action, God's talking about it, oh look, it matches to something that we see in the Old Testament from that. So those are the dreams that we looked at from Joseph and the wise men last week. Any comments, further embellishments that anybody feels to add? All right, we finished with one. Go ahead, Jack.
Just to say that God at sundry times in different ways spoke to the fathers by the prophets and so on. But today he speaks to us through his Son. And his Son speaks to us through the Word of God.
Right.
The Bible tells us that those things that were given in part, like speaking in tongues and all that stuff, when that which is perfect would come, that would be done away with.
Right.
God does not speak that way to us anymore, and we need to know that because there's a lot of people that says he does.
A lot of people believe he speaks right directly to them, right? More so than somebody standing up. We have some of those still that try to tell a big story about God telling them to do something and tell everybody from that. Certainly that's how the Mormon church started.
We have to study.
We have to study. Yep.
Paul said that in 2 Timothy 2:15.
Yep.
Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth.
That's right. We get it all from the Word now. That's that perfection went into it. And when he did show it from that, notice, as we talked about before, the dreams particularly, they weren't isolated to believers. So we have the wise men who came to worship him, but didn't say they really were, Jewish believers by any stretch of the imagination. On the other hand, of course, Joseph, much more faithful to the Jewish religion from that, but not always did they do that. But now it doesn't happen at all. And we don't see any more dreams beyond this last one that we talked about, which was Pilate's wife's dream. And we don't know that it was, as we'll summarize it at the end, was actually one that God provided. It may have been just a dream that she had out of her own imagination from that. But that's the last dream that we're called out in the New Testament, really. So we talked about that one. It was about Pilate. We know he was the governor of the area when Jesus was being tried and ultimately crucified from that. He was trying Jesus, as he found out, primarily on what would be Jewish charges, not really against the Roman government. They tried to make it that way and say, well, he says he's a king, and that would fly against Caesar. But that's not really what their charges were about. It was really charges about the relationship of him saying he was the Son of God from that. And so Pilate gets drawn into that because they can't execute the corporal punishment of killing somebody. And that's not been given to them as an ability to do that within the Roman government. Only the Roman government could kill somebody or order that they be killed. And so they have to go to the Roman government if they want him actually killed. And in this case, they want him to be crucified. And so Pilate gets dragged into that because he's the authority for making that happen. That's who's got that responsibility. So he's pulled into it from that. He sees an innocent man from what he can tell. Not an insurrectionist, not somebody that's trying to take over things from Caesar. He sees an innocent man from that. He also sees that the trial itself is due to envy. The leaders of the Jewish religion don't like Jesus saying that this is going away and there's another path and this is a more permanent one, not saying he's the Son of God. Well, that's much higher than any parole that they might have. So that's a challenge to them. And they're envious about the fact that people will follow him and that they'll, throw down the leaves and the coats in front of him as he came into town from that. So that trial, the whole idea of that was because of their envy, which has been going on for quite some time and just reaching the zenith right now. So during this, Matthew tells us that Pilate's wife had a dream about Jesus. We don't see that in the other three Gospels, although all talk about the trial to some extent from that. But that's the only one that mentions it. It says Pilate's wife had a dream about Jesus. And she sends a message to Pilate. Her message says he's an innocent man and leave him alone, and that the dream has troubled her from that. So she's, it's made her very uneasy for that. from the dream from that. Now, there's no reason to necessarily believe the dream was from God. Nowhere do we have read in there that God spoke to her, God told her this, or whatever. So this is the one dream out of the ones we've looked at that my guess is it may not at all be God that did it, because there's really no advantage that comes out of it, really. Nothing happens that moves the needle in any way, shape, or form, for the most part, and thus maybe why only one of the 4 gospel writers mentions it at all. But it could be that God put it in there. Maybe that is the reason why it's there. But I think more builds the case that Pilate was very, very much aware that there was no reason to ultimately crucify our Savior in that. And he knew that from his own judgment of that, and his wife had passed it along to him, and he was taking a risk. So we read, he washed his hands and tried to make it be, I'm not a part of this. But he is, because no way can the crucifixion happen without it being granted by him. So he can't wash his hands of it and just say, you do what you want to do. Well, you just made a decision. It's kind of like when we try to walk that fine line and not do one side or the other. We ultimately make a decision. If we're, it's that old idea, if you're not for me, then you're against me. You can't walk the middle ground from that. And Pilate couldn't do that with Jesus. But he liked to believe that. Any comments about that dream? Again, to a non-believer. But like I say, I'm not convinced it's a divine dream. Doesn't matter either way, but anyhow. So we're finally going to make it to visions. We've gone through at least the main ones of dreams to this point, so we'll go back to the beginning again in Genesis to pick up our visions from that. We talked about the difference between dreams and visions being the fact that dreams happen at night, visions happen during the day from that, and so that's one of the key things to think about in those. We also talked about originally that dreams, a lot of them, in fact the majority to some extent, were experienced by non-believers, but impacted the believers in one way or another. They may have interpreted it or affected them, how it got carried out, etc. Visions, as far as the ones that are called out, are all experienced by believers. We don't see that by non-believers from that, for whatever reason that God decided to do it that way. And as I've already mentioned in the earlier part, visions here does not necessarily, we think it does, because vision is what we see, right? But as we're going to see in the visions tonight, we don't have any image to see. There may have been one. I can't say there wasn't, but Scripture doesn't tell us of a vision, not an image to see. All it tells us about is a verbal, an oral exchange, one way or two way. That's all we get. And we've seen that with some of the dreams as well, but in visions, just by the term somewhat, you think that's going to have some kind of visual aspect to it, and we find that they don't always have that. You'll also find that we don't get them called out at the beginning necessarily. And from that, I think that there's probably a good chance that there are visions that are in the Bible that we can't classify that because they're not said to be visions, but they probably were. All right? But we're going to focus on only when the word vision is used for something. We're going to only tie ourselves to that, and I'm not going to try to interpret the Bible to say this was a vision versus something else. All right? But these are all going to be visions. So we'll start back with our friend Abram before he becomes Abraham, and in Genesis 15. In Genesis 15, Abram has a vision, or he hears the word. And so here you just see the word of the Lord came, but you also see the word vision there. So we do get it right away in this one. We won't in the next couple that we look at. We won't see that word vision come up until after it's been all explained, and then suddenly we'll get the word vision thrown in. So starting in verse 1 of chapter 15, after these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Again, it's just an oral exchange. Whether there's a vision, in the vision there's some kind of being that represents the Lord in it, I don't know. What does it say? Saying, do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your exceedingly great reward. Now, he's promised Abram several things, right? The promised land, a great name, tons of ancestors from there, relatives down the road. His seed will be mighty. But Abram's gotten a little concerned about that, obviously. And we know that there was various things about that along the way that happened with both him and Sarah. So in this case, he's again trying to give him that confidence and that assurance that he's going to deliver. But Abram said, Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless? And the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. So it shows, great Abram of faith is a little bit, iffy on it. Not, I think, in whether he'll deliver it exactly, but on the means by which he will deliver. We talked about that before with both him and Sarah. Sarah giving Haggai, her handmaiden, to him to have children is so that there was an heir, because she was getting old and she doubted that it would happen through her. And here he's saying, well, maybe what you want is me to just use Eliezer, just a servant in my household. I mean, I have no kids. There's nobody to inherit things from me, and you said my seed's going to grow. Is this what I'm going to get since I'm not got any children? What is your plan, God? So he kind of challenges God a little bit there. And then Abram said, look, you have given me no offspring. Indeed, one born in my house is my heir. So he says, God, if you're going to, if I die right now, this is how your promise is going to go. It's going to go to this one, servant that was born in my household, and that's going to be how the world gets populated with my heirs, and all nations get blessed, and numerous as the sands of the sea, et cetera, et cetera. And he's got an exclamation mark. He's saying it pretty boldly to God from that, making a challenge of what's going to happen here. You haven't delivered on that somewhat. Continuing on in verse 4. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. Again, the word speaks to him just like it was in the previous one, saying, this one shall not be your heir, but one who will come from your own body shall be your heir. Now, obviously, when it says word of the Lord, a lot of people think maybe that's Jesus, because that's the word we find in John. I'm not saying that's it, but God speaking to him one way or the other. But he again reiterates the plan is for a true heir. You will have an heir. It will be somebody that you have sired that is clearly in your bloodline. It's not going to be this servant that's born in your household. I'm going to deliver based on what I've told you before. Then he, God, brought him, Abram, outside and said, look now toward the heaven and count the stars if you are able to number them. Yeah. If you've ever gone out and, an isolated part of the deal, not in the city, go out somewhere where it's just no lights of any kind, and you look up at the sky on a clear night, you can be very intimidated by the number of stars that are up there. We don't get too much of a feel for that in the city when we look up. We probably can count the number of stars we can see. But you get out like they are out there and, with no real city lights in those days, yeah. That gives you a feeling of just how innumerable the heirs were supposed to become from that. And he said to him, so shall your descendants be. Just as hard to account as that is what's going to be your descendants from that. I'm still giving you the promise I've given along the way. And he, that being Abram, believed in the Lord. And he, capitalized now, he being God in this case, counted to him, Abram, for righteousness. And we get that statement numerous times about it being counted to Abram for righteousness, or Abraham for righteousness of his faith in God's promises from that. Just as we saw later on with his situation with Isaac. Right? So God assures him that you're going to have an heir, and I'm going to deliver on my promise that you're going to, have descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. You just have to believe in me. It may not be in your time frame. It may not be when you think it's feasible, but anything's possible with God. And I'm still going to deliver just like I promised you. Then Abram asked for a sign for a land promise. Remember, they're going to get the promised land too, and right now he's just a nomad. He doesn't own land there. He's just traveling around in what will be the promised land from that. And then he said to him, that capitalized again, God said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to inherit it. So they've talked about one of the promises that he made, which was that he would have, innumerable descendants from that. God's kind of assured him about that one. Now he's maybe doubting this one. You have got a piece of land that's to your name right now. You're just traveling around in it. There's people that are living here, cities, and, you're going to get it. I promised you when I came out, called you out of the land of Ur, that you're going to get this land, and I still stick by that. That's another promise I've given you, and just as true as the first one, the second one is just as true from that. And now he, Abram, said, Lord God, how shall I know that I will inherit it? Still, a little lack of faith on Abraham's part. So just like it was with the other one, he challenged, and could you do it with Eliezer? Well, how do I know I'm going to get this? I got nothing now. Just me and my limited, entourage here. I'm not going to take over the land. How do I know that's going to be something I'm inheriting? So he, God in this case, said to him, Abram, bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. So it calls for a bunch of things. obviously we get to the idea this is going to be a sacrifice or something along those lines. So that tells him exactly what he wants him to bring to him. And then he brought all these to him, God, and cut them in two, down the middle, and placed each piece opposite the other, but he did not cut the birds in two. So it puts them apart from each other. There's a aisleway or a pathway between them of some size. And whether that was at God's direction or he came up with that, assume it's God's, because we're going to see what he does with that later on. And when the vultures came down on the carcasses, when they came to get it, as they naturally would to try to get that meat, Abram drove them away. That's not a part of God's plan. Leave them alone. God's going to do something with these things that I'm sacrificing to him, that he's called for. Now, when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram. And behold, horror and great darkness fell upon him. That doesn't sound very pleasant to God. You get a horror and a darkness and kind of a foreboding kind of environment that he's in there as he's in this deep sleep, and that's kind of what his dream is from that. And then he said to Abram, so clearly part of that he must have woke up, he was doing things with it, so his vision has kind of got two parts to it. Then God said to Abram, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs. Right? We know that will become Egypt, right? They'll be taken into Egypt. Or they'll go into Egypt, they'll be put under that control, and we'll serve them and we'll afflict them 400 years. Well, thanks, God. I asked you whether we're going to inherit it, and what do you start out with? Well, first of all, I've got this horror and darkness, and next thing you go is, oh, you know what, your people, they're going to be somewhere that they're going to have served people for 400 years. Hey, this sounds terrific. So I won't be getting the land? Is that what you're telling me from that? I guess that's what he's starting to think is, how does this figure out, God? And also the nation whom they serve, I will judge. They're not going to get away with this. I'm going to use them, but I will judge them. And afterward they shall come out with great possession. That will be the Israelites. They'll come out with great possessions. If you remember that, when they go out from the land of Egypt, God encourages them to ask from their Egyptian neighbors to borrow their nice robes, their gold, their silver, all the things of value from them, and the Egyptians did. They really pillaged the Egyptians without having to do anything of violence, other than, obviously, there was ultimately the death of the firstborn that God did. Now, as far as you, that being Abram, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You're going to go there and under any of these difficult situations. You're going to go peacefully, die of old age, basically, is what he's saying from that. And you should be buried at a good old age. But in the fourth generation, that is, 4 generations, in that case being 100 years, because they live longer from that, that's what he defined as generation, they shall return here. I told you this is the promised land that you're wandering around now. I tell you they're going to go to another land for 400 years, but at the end of that 400 years, they're going to come back here. For the iniquity of the Amorites, that's the natives. That's the people that he's hanging around with right now. They're evil people now. But he says the iniquity, their sins, is not yet complete. They're going to get 400 years of somewhat, chance to exercise their free will, even though God knows how that's going to turn out. They're not going to change their ways. They're going to become more sinful. And at the end of that, God's going to have lost all his patience. And thus God will tell Moses not just to, take the land, but to wipe out the people entirely. It's because of that iniquity. So the 400 years is for them to do that. Why God thought that the Israelites should suffer during that 400 years as a part of that is God's idea. We don't know exactly what it was. To teach them humility, whatever. Didn't work real well, if that's what it was. They turned back on him pretty quickly. Even though they'd gone through those difficult times, they wanted to go back to him. So it may not work. But we don't know really why God wanted to do 400 years of them doing it. I don't know anyway. If you know in Scripture that tells you, let us know. But don't really know why. But the 400 years was very much to allow the Amorites to reach a zenith of their level of evil, much like the evil of the time of the great flood. And everything in their hearts and minds was evil all the time. Moving on to verse 17. And it came to pass when the sun went down, and it was dark, that behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a burning torch that passed between those pieces. So now we have at least 2 things in this that probably are part of the vision. So we do have some visual in this one from that. Most of it's been words, but to this point now there appears a smoking oven and a burning torch passing between those pieces. Those seemingly would represent the smoking oven very much indicating the difficult times that they would go through and the affliction that they would have in Egypt ultimately. Maybe associated somewhat with the making bricks. We don't know, but that's seemingly what they believed as it was going through, that was a symbol of that. The burning torch, of course, we get the torches, God's light from that, and that's more of a positive thing from that. So we get both the negative of what's going to happen and the positive from what passes through them is how many people have interpreted that. Whether it is or not, I can't say, but that's kind of how people have viewed those two things. One negative about what's ahead, and one positive, what's ahead beyond that from that. And on the same day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram. Made an agreement. Not that he hadn't made it before, but he more specifies. Promised to give him a promised land before. Now he's going to kind of define a little bit more what that is made up of by basing it on the people that are going to be taken over from that. So he says, to your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt, we all know what that is, the Nile, to the great river, the river Euphrates, the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgasites, and the Jebusites. And most all those we see when they go and conquer the land are called out from that. But he says this is what they're going to get land-wise. Where they are, they're going to get conquered. That's going to be your land. And he understands, because he's been no batting around in that area, he understands who God's talking about and what that land is that they're looking at without calling out boundaries, other than where these people lived and what they called as their boundaries from that. So God gives it saying, this is what I'm going to give you. That's my promise to you, Abram. You've questioned it somewhat, but I'm going to reiterate and now give you a little bit more specificity of what I'm going to give you. Any comments before we look at our questions? Kent. Yeah.
And to think of, okay, God just told me to do this, I better get to work. And that didn't really hit me before. To me, that's another step of it saying, okay, if God says do it, this is the way it's going to go, I better get after it. So that's a lot of faith.
It's a lot of faith. And it's interesting to think, it's all pointless, but to think, did God help him along with that to make it easy for the heifer to follow him? And they, butchered it right there where they're going to sacrifice. What is it, difficult and pulling like they oftentimes are, don't want to cooperate from that? We don't know. I mean, we assume that like with the ark, God made the animals, docile to some extent and obedient to Noah to make all that happen. We don't know what happened here, but certainly it's still a challenge.
And the oven and the torch reminded me of how God led the people of Israel in the daytime and the nighttime with the smoke versus the
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of possibilities of what all it means from that. Like I said, I'm just telling you what some of the people think of it, but there's nothing in the Bible that says this is exactly what they mean. So there's a lot of tie-ins that you can make to other things from that, and not necessarily anything wrong with making those tie-ins. They don't change anything. Any other comments? Guy?
It's interesting that it talks about the river Euphrates, and it goes back. That's the same river as what went through when Adam and Eve were.
Yeah, at least called the same. It's called the same. Now, of course, you got to remember would have been from that. Although we've, one's on one side of the flood and one's on the other side of the flood. And by that I mean I don't know that they're necessarily the same exact river or they use the name the same. You know what I mean?
They didn't in mind.
They had it in mind. So, which does indicate that it probably was a very fertile area right close to it, which is normally true of a river area anyway. But I think, yeah, they would see some similarities to what they had heard or knew from that, but I wouldn't say that, that is the same river, Euphrates, after the flood, because, like say, you have Noah and his 3 sons and their wives are all that's there, and how much of the country they looked at, where this, if you look at it. But it's interesting. It's interesting.
From the Nile to the Euphrates, that was a mighty big, quite a distance.
Yeah, it's a pretty big area. And they didn't really get down to the Nile ultimately and what the land that they got. So it's interesting, talks about the great river of Egypt from that. All right, our questions are asked ourselves, who had In this case, vision, because we've moved to visions. Abram had this as a vision. The situation when it occurred is, I think he was becoming, I wouldn't say unfaithful, a little bit, starting doubt was creeping in, right? Time's gone on. I'm getting old. Sarah's getting old. I'm not seeing really any of this fulfillment. God's promised me things. He's promised me that I'm going to have all these heirs, and I don't have any right now. He's promised me land, and I'm still just wandering around as a nomad. I don't own it. So, I'm thinking, even though for us it'd be really bad because, you're talking about a man that's, in his upper ages for us. For him, he lived a lot longer after that. But to us, we'd really been questioning it. Him, it's still creeping in because it's not the time that you're going to have children, and certainly not for his wife, as we know. But so he's got a little bit of doubt creeping in at that point. The content of the vision, most of it is verbal, and maybe two parts to it from that. So most of it's what God's saying to him from that. The only part that may not be, whether it's a vision or it really happened, the things went through there, we don't know, but the things that went through the two, the halves of the different animals may or may not have been part of the vision itself, but the words were certainly a part of the vision. The purpose of that was to reiterate his promises to Abram and his assurance that he was going to deliver on those promises to Abram as he began it out. So build him up a little bit, strengthen his faith a little bit. Yeah, guy.
It's interesting that Abram and Sarah were so old that God could do that. And
But that's always...
you don't know God's thinking.
That's right.
Nobody does.
And it was a good point for God to make sure that they understood he did it, right? It's much like when things... Yeah, he could do anything. But when he would defeat large armies with virtually nobody, he wanted to prove to them, it was me doing it, not you doing this. And that's what he wanted to do with this, that I promised you an heir. It's not, you just had a kid, you go, yeah, well, I had a kid, And God sort of promised it. But, me and Sarah got together. So I know who was involved at the time. So it's just a natural thing. Well, it's not a natural thing if it happens that much late in life. Now, Abram, of course, Abraham as it was by that time, talk about how old he is, but he did go and have other kids after Sarah died. So he did go on, but for her, it would have been the end of those things normally. So it was for God to prove those things out. And I think that's why he waited, was to make sure there was no question he was behind it. I'll fulfill the promise on my terms, and it'll be in a way that I did it. Like getting them out of Egypt to give them the land. You're going to come from being captives to being landowners of land and stuff that you never even created from that. And the only way that happens, me, not you. How did it figure into God's general plan? Well, his general plan obviously was what he'd outlined before. It figured into that just to make sure he kept Abram, on board and helped fortify his faith. I don't think he'd lost it, but again, he was constantly trying to look at ways to help God along with it to make those. And Eliezer as a possible heir was, okay, doesn't make sense to me, but if that's that's your plan, let me know. We'll take care of it. I'll make sure my will leaves everything to Eliezer, and we start working down that path. But that's not what I thought you meant, God. And so God's reiterating his plans, which all leads ultimately to us, to Jesus, and to what we have today. Yeah.
It was God's plan, working through these prophets and these different things to bring Jesus Christ into the world.
Yep.
Through Abraham's seed, Jesus came. And he's the Savior of the world, and we need to listen to him today.
That's right. That's right. And that's what he said about going to bless all the nations of the world. That didn't happen through the Jews. It only happened through Jesus that was occurred. And that's what blesses today. And like I say, that's why, he communicates a different way and he acts in a different way. He doesn't have to do the miraculous. Again, I wouldn't take miracles out of his hands, but he doesn't do them to support what people are saying from that. He doesn't do it in an obvious way. All right. The next one is one you probably are very familiar with, which is Samuel. So we saw Samuel, I think, before when we looked at dreams, but now we're going to talk about him with regards to vision. And so let's get a little bit of background for Samuel. You'll definitely have gotten it when I taught, 2 quarters ago? And here I am. He's a big sayer of here I am in the story. So if you don't recall, a woman named Hannah, seemed very faithful, was barren. And she was in a sister-wife kind of situation. So she had another woman that was the wife of her husband too, and she was, able to reproduce, and Hannah wasn't, and so she got ridiculed. Partially because, much as we see in the situation later on with Leah and Rachel, he loves Hannah more than he loved his other wife from that. But Hannah's barren, and she's getting ridiculed for that situation. Like I said, her husband loves her, but he can't console her. He can't say, hey, you've got me. You've got my love. You're number one with me. Isn't that enough for you? Well, it's not. She knows that to some extent, the way that women were valued was producing, children, particularly male children. And so she doesn't feel very valuable to him, not being able to reproduce for him, produce those heirs from that. So he can't console her from that. And so Hannah, they make an annual pilgrimage to be able to go to where the tabernacle is and to take sacrifices and stuff to offer. And while she's there, she prays to God for a son. And she promises God that she will give him to God's service. If you just give it to her, give her a son, she will turn around and dedicate him and dedicate the way he lives to God's service from that. And during that, of course, Eli hears that. He, of course, thinks that because she's mouthing the words and not verbally saying anything, that seems to him to mean that she's drunk. So he challenges her on that. She assures him not. When he hears that, he doesn't even necessarily know what she asked for, but he adds his request. If she's that fervent about something, he says to God, you should grant her petition to you. And of course, the result of that is God opens her womb up, and she gives birth to Samuel. And after he's weaned, she takes him there, and they give him in service, which means handing him over to Eli, who is the high priest. So he's the leader there at the temple. And so they turn over their son. Now, every year she comes back and brings him a new robe. There's still that association, but he's put into the service immediately from that. So that's the background. Then we pick it up then in 1 Samuel chapter 3, starting with the first verse. Then the boy Samuel, and many think that he was about 12 maybe when this happened. We don't know that, but that's what people assume. Ministered to the Lord before Eli. So Eli's in charge, and he gives him certain tasks that a 12-year-old can execute from that. So he's under Eli's direction as to what he does. And the word of the Lord was rare. What does that mean? Well, where did we see the word of the Lord when it was involved with Abram? We saw it talking to Abram. So when it talks about the word of the Lord here, there's not a lot of prophecies going on. There's not a whole lot of God talking to him and telling him anything. There's not prophets wandering around. We only see a mention of 2 prophets, for example, in Judges during that whole period of time. There may have been others, but there's only 2 mentioned there. So there's very little of that. And it also says, and there was no widespread revelation. There wasn't a whole lot being shared about what God's plans were or any direction that he had for his people during this period of time. God had been pretty much silent. He's letting things run and not injecting anything into that. And it came to pass at that time, when this was the situation, Samuel's ministering under Eli's direction, not hearing from God very much through prophets. While Eli was lying down in his place, he's gone to bed, and when his eyes had begun to grow so dim that he could not see, by that we mean he's getting old and his eyesight's going out on him. It's not about what time of night it is or anything like that, but it's just he's getting to where he's old and he can't see very well. And before the lamp of God went out in the tabernacle of the Lord, where the ark of God was, and that's pretty much tied to the fact that they would put out, the lamp would burn during the night, they would put it out in the morning hours and twilight time as the sun was going to come up. They didn't need the lamp anymore, but they always had a light, one way or the other, natural or a lamp for the tabernacle itself from that. And so it's talking about it being kind of the twilight, haven't reached the twilight hours yet, so sometime during the evening or night, rather. And while Samuel was lying down, he's lying down to sleep. Eli's lying down to sleep at this point in time, somewhere fairly close to the tabernacle, that the Lord called Samuel. The word of the Lord's now involved. And Samuel, very obedient child, he's been raised well by Eli, and certainly an example of his mother, says, "Here I am." Remember, we talked about that when we talked about "Here I am." So he responds very quickly to it, but he doesn't know who's asking for him. So while he says it there, he then follows it up. So he ran to Eli. He's very quick and responsive to it. He didn't just walk there. He didn't wander there. He didn't take his time. He ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me. I'm here because you asked for me to be here. I'm not bugging you in the middle of your sleep. I'm not getting you interrupted from that on my account. But you asked for me. I'm here just like you called for me." And he, that being Eli, said, "I did not call. Lie down again." You know, you heard some noise, you've imagined something. I didn't call you. Go back to sleep until it's time to get up. So what does he do? Obedient, he went and laid down. Then the Lord called him yet again, a second time. He said, "Samuel." So Samuel arose and went to Eli. This time he didn't just speak out because he knows Eli's been laying in his bed. So he knows he's not right there to speak to, but he instead gets up and he went to Eli. We don't know if he ran this time, but he went to Eli and he said, "Here I am, for you called me." Same words as before. Probably a little confused about it. And Eli answered, "I did not call, my son. Lie down again." They're both probably getting a little irritated at this point. You know, both of them. Samuel's going, "You did call me. I heard you. I heard it. Who else is around?" And Eli's going, "I don't know what this kid's about. I don't know what's going on with him, but I didn't call him." Now, Samuel did not yet know the Lord. That means he didn't have that connection that a prophet had with the Lord. Nor was the word of the Lord yet revealed to him. Nor had he got to learn what God was going to speak to him, that was the way he was going to be a prophet from that. So at that point, he had no reason to believe the Lord was directly talking to him. It didn't happen to other people in this time frame. It wouldn't likely happen to another 12-year-old. So if someone's talking to me, it's got to be Eli. I'm not going to guess that it's God by any stretch. That would be ridiculous. So what happens? Verse 8, "And the Lord called Samuel again the third time." Now usually the third time's a charm, right? Isn't that what they always say? Third time's a charm? It is only in the fact that they change their plans at this point. They kind of recognize what's going on. "Then he arose," that being Samuel, "and went to Eli and said, 'Here I am, for you did call me.'" This time he's not even going to say it. He's going to go, "Listen, I know what I heard. I never even fell asleep since the last times. I know you called me. You did it. Don't be playing games with me." Then Eli perceived that the Lord had called the boy. Now, I think what he perceived out of that is, this isn't a joke that Samuel's playing on me, and it's not that he heard some noise. He's heard his name being called out. I didn't do it. There's nobody else around here. Who else would call out his name? It's got to be God. It's got to be God. He probably thinks back to how Samuel came into his service there and how that worked out from Hannah offering him in service from her prayer from that. But for whatever case, he perceived the Lord had called the boy. Now he's going to change his directions. He said, "Therefore Eli said to Samuel, 'Go, lie down.'" Well, that's the same as before. "And it shall be if he," and he's very much indicating without saying it, that point, "calls you," he indicates it's not me calling you. You can guess, Samuel, who that is, or I'll explain in a moment. "That you must say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant hears.'" Ever wonder what Samuel thought at that point in time? Eli is directly saying, you know who's been talking to you? It's God. God's talking to nobody. You're 12 years old. I've never had God talk to me. God's talking to you. So go back and ask him what he wants to tell you, because he apparently has a message just for you. Well, if Samuel had ever fallen asleep when he went back before, he didn't fall asleep this time, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure he was nervous, maybe excited, but a lot of nerves going on at that point. But so Samuel went and laid down in his place. He did obediently go back and get to where he was before in preparation for what God was going to do next. And what does he do? "Now the Lord came and stood and called out as other times." Does that mean the vision had a visual aspect to it? I don't know. We can't never see you can't see God or you wouldn't live. So we don't really know what that necessarily means. It means it was close enough. It seemed like he was standing there and he called to him. I don't know. But in any case, it was at other times, so it would have been somewhat the same as he had before. "Samuel, Samuel." Although I think he said it twice here and maybe once every other time. "And Samuel answered, just as he'd been told to, 'Speak, for your servant hears.'" I know who you are. You got a message for me? God, share it with me. I'm ready. This time I'm not going to run to Eli. I'm going to sit here and let you tell me why you're calling me. Then the Lord said to Samuel, behold, I will do something in Israel at which both ears of everyone who hears it will tingle. It means this is going to like echo in their heads when they hear this kind of information, what I'm going to share with you. It's just going to be that kind of information that I'm going to share that you just keep hearing it to some extent from that. In that day, I will perform against Eli, oh, I know Eli, all that I have spoken concerning his house, from beginning to end. I'm going to deliver what I've told Eli I was going to do. He's not gotten this straightened out. And so now it's kind of the day of judgment, or the day of execution of the sentence that I've made to him from that. For I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knows. He knows about it. Eli has known about it, and he hasn't addressed it. Thus, I'm now going to carry out what I said I would do if he didn't get it fixed. Because his sons made themselves vile, and he did not restrain them. They were good about making sure they got the best parts of the meat, not what they were supposed to do. They get it ahead of times. They were having sexual relationships with the women that served around the tabernacle. They were doing lots of things in holding things over the people that were not what God wanted directed. And as God's representatives as priests, not something God could tolerate and keep going from that. And he did not restrain them. So like you said, it's his sons. He didn't stop them. He didn't put them in a deal. We see that in less of a form later on with Aaron, right? And his sons that got wiped out for offering the wrong incense from that. And therefore I have sworn to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house, the sin of Eli's house, of his family, not necessarily Eli, but his children, shall not be atoned for by sacrifice or offering forever. We've gotten past that point. There's no longer an opportunity for Eli to fix this with me. That time has run out. It's now time to execute the judgment on it. There's nothing that you can do, nothing he can do at this point to change what's going to happen. I'm going to carry out what I've already told him I'm going to do from that. So, Samuel laid down till morning. So he went back. He just stayed there in bed. He wasn't up for that message. I assume he didn't go back to sleep. I don't think you could with that kind of information. And then when the morning came, he opened the doors of the house of the Lord, probably one of his normal duties from that. And Samuel was afraid to tell Eli the vision. There's when we know it's a vision. Notice nowhere before do we get how God's talking to him. Now it's described as a vision. That's why I say other things happen sometimes in the Bible that would be somewhat like this, but we don't get the word vision with it. So they may or may not have been visions. This one, the writer says, was a vision from that. So he's up. He's got this terrible information that is impacting the person that isn't his father, but it's certainly the person he's grown up with, that he's seen as a father figure through all that, and he is not looking forward to a discussion of it. So then Eli called Samuel and said, Samuel, my son. And that's the way he looked at him, I'm sure. And he answered, we know from my other study, here I am. He's not going to go and hide from it. He's not going to not show up. He's not going to ignore the call to him because he doesn't want to share the information. He's still a very obedient child. And he said, that being Eli, what is the word that the Lord spoke to you? Listen, I know when you went back and you did what I said, God finished up talking to you. He was that adamant by asking, calling out your name all those times. He didn't just then not speak to you. So I know there's a message, and I want you to tell me what that message. Please do not hide it from me. Does Eli know what that message is or have a good idea about what it is? Absolutely. He also knows if it was a great information, what would have happened with Samuel? Samuel wouldn't have laid back down. Samuel would have ran into Eli and had to share it with him immediately. If it was great news, he wouldn't have left it and just waited for you. Oh, now you want to know? Well, you're going to be a rich man. Nothing was going to be good out of this. And he knew that. And so he says, don't hide it from me. And he adds to it a little bit to, you got the carrot and the stick. He's going to give the stick now. He said, God do so to you because I know this is negative. That's why he won't tell me. So have him do it to you what he told you, and more also if you hide anything from me of all the things that he said to you. I'm pretty sure it involves me or the people, and it's not good. If you don't tell me, may he make that much and even worse come just upon you because you're not telling me, not sharing with me. So then Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. Samuel bears his soul and shares it all with him, all the bad information that he had, exactly what God told him. Not that he wanted Eli to hear it, not that he wanted Eli to have it turn out that way, much as we saw when Joseph was interpreting and said, let this not be on you, or Daniel rather, with Nebuchadnezzar. Don't let this be let this go on your enemies. He didn't even do that. He said, this is what God said about you and your family. And Eli said, it is the Lord. Let him do what seems good to him. I mean, there really wasn't any other option, was there? God had said, there's nothing he can do. There's nothing Eli can do or his sons can do anymore. The sentence is coming down. And so Eli, who's fairly faithful to God, but not a very good father, says, it's God's word, it's God describing his plan and what he's going to execute, then I'm going to say he needs to be able to do what he feels is the right thing to do, even if I don't like it, even if it's not comfortable for me. And he shows a lot of faith, at least at that point. And he makes it a lot easier on Samuel, right? It's not good news, but at least Eli didn't break down in tears. He didn't call him a liar. He didn't try to beat him for bad news or anything else. He accepted it, and he showed a great example to Samuel about taking God's judgments when you earn them, whatever that is, good or bad. A great lesson. Yeah, Ken.
You know the last verse up there where he says it is the Lord, let him do what seems good to him. It makes me wonder if the actual word for the Lord is Yahweh, with the ultimate of respect.
Yeah.
Because it seems like Eli had this submissive attitude that's constant amongst all these faithful people that we see, like in Hebrews 11. You hear it in Abraham, you hear it in Job even. Said, who am I to question God?
Right.
And he just basically went on his knees and said, Lord, your will be done. And that ultimately continues right to the crucifixion when Jesus' words, not my will, but thine.
Yep. Yep. Very much. Although we don't know what Eli's fate was. We don't have him in the Hall of Fame of Faith from that. He certainly made big errors there, but everybody does. Everybody did that's in there. So don't know whether he, was accepted by God. We'll find him in heaven, or, that sin was enough. We'll sentence it out of it because he didn't fix that prevented it. But it is very much, you see it over and over again, where that humility and that giving in to God, that it's his judgment and let it be that way. So God continues with him as he becomes a prophet. So Samuel grew and the Lord was with him and let none of his words fall to the ground, meaning they were heard, they were shared. People took them seriously from that. And all Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, knew that Samuel had been established as a prophet. So this wasn't a secret what happened. Everybody knew that he had been the one God had spoken to. They knew the story that we now know. And they understood that meant he was a prophet from God. Then it says, and then the Lord appeared again in Shiloh. For the Lord revealed himself to Samuel in Shiloh by the word of the Lord. Indication, again, revealed there is probably another vision. But again, the word's not called out that way. But God speaks to him again one way or the other. Now that's an interesting one. So if we look at an epilogue, what followed after this, apparently in that, we can only surmise because there's not a clearness of this, but God seems to tell Samuel that the people should go to war with the Philistines. That's what follows. It says it was that, and then suddenly they're going off to war. So that may be a wrong assumption, but it seems most obvious from that they knew it, and God spoke to them, and suddenly they go off in the next chapter to go to war. The battle initially goes to the Philistines. They win and kill a lot of the Israelites. They're very upset, that is the Israelites. They come up with a plan. The elders come up with a plan. They say, hey, let's get the ark. So they send for the ark to be with them. That'll lead them on, just as it had done, in crossing over the Jordan, for example. So they think that'll be the solution. So when they send for it, Guess who comes with it? Eli's sons. His sons come along with the ark. So, hey, it's terrific. They yell and shout so much that the Philistines hear about it, and they assume, oh, we're in big trouble. But even though they're intimidated, they again prevail and kill a lot of Israelites, including Eli's 2 sons. And they also take the ark. Eli is therefore told of the defeat, of his son's death and the ark, and when that happens, he falls over backwards. He's old, he's fat, he breaks his neck, and he dies. Pretty much the end of his family lines from that. Even his daughter-in-law dies of childbirth after that. Tough times for Eli's family. But God's message, the vision that Samuel had, gets carried out fairly soon afterwards. Again, who had it? It was Samuel. What was the situation when it occurred? It was a lot of sin by Eli's children, and he hadn't taken care of it. The content of the dream vision was basically just, I'm going to do what I said to Eli, and he's going to get family wiped out from that. The purpose was to indicate that and very much establish Samuel as the main leader religiously, because now Eli's gone and his children, which is where it passed down most of the time, they're gone. Samuel's been the one that served as a pseudo-child. He's now God's high priest, so to speak. And therefore it leads into God's general plan. Samuel will be the one that will go forth as the last judge and put into place the kings, and kind of carry a lot of that stuff out as we move to King David and on to, again, God's fulfillment of the plan in Jesus as the ultimate king. Any other thoughts or comments? Because we're over time by a few minutes now. I apologize, but I wanted to finish. All right, we'll start next week with Nathan's vision, 2 Samuel 7, or you can find it in 1 Chronicles 17. Thanks for your input.